Thank you, sir, and good afternoon. In my presentation, I'll try to bridge, based on the presentation earlier from the earlier panel from my good friend General Jericho, and try to bridge it with the forthcoming presentation of another good friend, Admiral Gaban, later on in my panel. Next slide, please. Based on this slide, we can discern the extent of China's global and maritime ambition. And what we can discern are three, what we call maritime axes of advance. The northern one would explain away why President Trump is interested in Greenland, because it's an axis of advance headed towards the Arctic Ocean, leading towards Europe. The second, the middle axis of advance, cuts through East Asia to the Mid-Pacific and to South America, and explains away why State Secretary Rubio is in Panama right now. And the third axis of advance is one the Philippines is familiar with. It cuts through South China Sea, Malacca Strait, Indian Ocean. Then from there, it diverges to the Middle East for oil, Africa for resources, and Europe for trade. This axis of advance explains away China's both maritime and economic lines of efforts. Next slide, please. The 9-dash line or 10-dash line has been legally debunked. But from a naval perspective, 9-dash line makes sense. It's all about sea control. China intends to assert sea control over the East and the South China Sea, particularly controlling the sea lines of communication that cuts across the coastal states of Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, and northern Borneo. Next slide, please. This is not a Philippine problem, but it affects East Asia. This is about the disparity between the PLA Navy and the US Navy. This is based on the report of the US Congressional Research Service in 2020, which simply states that as of 2015, the PL Navy, in terms of combatant vessels, has surpassed the US Navy. And the trajectory of that disparity is still increasing. Now, you begs the question, how does it affect us here in the region? It creates what we call an imbalance of regional naval power. Okay? The combined navies of East Asia could not match the PLA Navy. And we're not even including the Coast Guard and the militia. Next slide, please. This disparity or imbalance of naval power creates the ecosystem or the opportunity for China's maritime forces, which is a combination of the PLA Navy, the Chinese Coast Guard, and the militia, plus its occupied isles and features in the Spratlys, to exert or to provide the enablers for sea control, not only the South China Sea, but also in East Asia. At the heart of this maritime activity is, of course, the Central Committee and the Central Military Commission. One of the reasons why we have disagreement with the concept of gray zone is the fact that it only reflects the actions of the Coast Guard and the militia. And I believe that the Philippines' move to rename it as ICAD is actually the correct position. Next slide, please. This slide I borrowed from John Cole. He works with the Prospect Foundation right now in Taiwan. It reflects the influence operations and how it best describes China's political warfare. The more important component from a maritime sense would be the sixth one in terms of economic and psychological coercion. I believe that China's actions in Scarborough Shoal, in Reed Bank, and basically the entire breadth of the West Philippine Sea is a form of economic and psychological coercion designed to shatter the Filipinos' will to fight and moral ascendancy. Next slide, please. Taking all these things together, what I'm trying to say is the Philippines is confronted by two lines of effort, the sharp power end of China and its hard power part. The obvious one is, of course, the hard power part, which is manifesting in terms of the PLA Navy, the Coast Guard, and the militia. But the back end of that is the sharp power end of China's power, which is manifesting in terms of diplomatic, economic, and as well as propaganda lines of efforts. Mix it all together, the impact of influence operations and gray zone or ICAD operations is designed not only is eventually to control the South China Sea. Next slide, please. If we could deconstruct it further in terms of the instruments of diplomacy, propaganda, military, and economic aspects, and how it impacts on the political, economic, socio-economic, technological, environmental, and military aspects, this is how it would look like. Next slide, please. And in this slide, we are looking at the potential responses of the region with respect to the actions of China. Next slide, please. If I am sitting right now in the general headquarters in Camp Aguinaldo, this will be my threat board. The Philippines is looking at a 360-degree threat. Historically, Philippines has considered its threat axis coming from the west because of China and the south because of transnational terrorism. But because of the uptick of China's activities, we now are looking also at the north because of Taiwan and the east because of China's actions in the Mid-Pacific, particularly in Solomon Islands. When I give this lecture to my students at school, I will always say jokingly that the Philippines at some point, if this is not addressed, will now feel how it feels to be a chicken sandwich, placed in between the first and the second island chain. Next slide, please. ICAD manifests in the following, in terms of blockade of Second Thomas Shoal, quote-unquote blockade. My friend Dr. J. Batumbakal always cautions me not to use the word blockade because it's an act of war. So sometimes I use quasi-blockade, but this time I use quote-unquote blockade of Scarborough, Second Thomas Shoal. Mission kill tactics of Philippine Navy vessels, supply vessels. The blockade of Scarborough Shoal, and of course, the constructive occupation of Whitsun Reef by using or nesting several militia vessels together and basically occupying the island, the feature, without leaving for a certain period of time. Against all these, next slide, please. The Philippines has looked at Transparency Initiative as a way to break the information space, to counter Chinese propaganda and to put forward the truth versus the falsehood that Beijing is trying to propagate. Next slide. Also, for some period of time, the Philippines has not patrolled its exclusive economic zone, particularly Scarborough Shoal. But with the directive coming to President Marcos, we have at some point finally restored our presence in those key areas. Next slide, please. On the military side, we're looking at developing the capabilities to at least be able to deter Chinese preponderance of force in the West Philippine Sea. We've acquired the BrahMos anti-ship missile system from India as a sea denial system, but of course it's not enough. When we planned for this was in 2016, but the advent or the preponderance of militia vessels tell us we need to look at other systems like drones to address the preponderance of fishery militia vessels. Next slide, please. Philippines is part of a complex set of minilaterals. One mentioned earlier this morning is about the trilateral between the US, Japan, and the Philippines, which offers some hope in terms of looking at a joint effort to counter Chinese activities in the area. In this month, we will have two more I will personally be involved in two track 2 engagements. One would be a trilateral between the Philippines, Japan, and Australia. And later on, a trilateral between Taiwan, the Philippines, and Japan. This tells you that the geometry of unilateral arrangements put forward in the region is actually a response to the region's worry that the hub and spokes that has defined the security architecture based on Indo-PACOM or PACOM's presence is somewhat diminishing. Next slide, please. We are also looking at, within ASEAN, certain mechanisms that may offer hope as confidence-building measures, such as the ASEAN Guidelines for Maritime Interaction, the ASEAN Coast Guard Forum, and the ASEAN Agreement on Aeronautical and Maritime Search and Rescue Cooperation. These are benign arrangements which can involve as well China in terms of activities, and this could be opportunities as for confidence and trust building. Next slide, please. There was a time that I was asked to discuss on the potentials for Quad, and one of the proposals I propounded was one: if Quad can be, if the U.S. cannot be in the Indo-Pacific all by itself, the Quad needs to look at creating spheres of cooperation within the region, with India taking the South Asia part, as well as Southeast Asia, the Philippines, as well as the other countries taking care of East Asia, and Australia and France in the Mid-Pacific. These spheres of cooperation would hopefully be mutually supporting and create synergy to at least provide modicum of strength or robustness to deal with China. Takeaways. Next slide, please. If we're looking at the potential scenarios that we face in the region, there are two that I am concerned with. The upper right scenario is something that we are now facing, is the potential of China having effective sea control of the East and the South China Sea. Basically because, as I discussed earlier, because of the preponderance of force of its Navy, Coast Guard, and militia. The second one, the lower left scenario, is something that will be the potential outcome of a diminished presence of U.S. activities in the region, which would be a rise of other middle powers such as Japan, Australia, and maybe Indonesia, taking the cudgels for a diminished U.S. presence. Next slide. From the practical, let me go to theoretical. If we look at what is happening in the Southeast Asia and the South China Sea, we can look at two distinguished gentlemen as a basis for maybe describing what's happening. First one will be the American naval strategist Alfred Thayer Mahan, who wrote The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, and what formed the basis of U.S. Navy's doctrines. The second one is a French officer, David Galula, who wrote the book on counterinsurgency. Those two gentlemen could body of work could best describe what is happening now in the South China Sea. Next slide, please. I was once asked to write for the U.S. Naval Proceedings on the thematic area of maritime counterinsurgency. So if we say that China's ICAD gray zone is actually a form of maritime insurgency, obviously what we need is a maritime counterinsurgency campaign to deal with China. And using David Galula's 4 laws of counterinsurgency, I propounded that one, we need to look at ASEAN or Southeast Asia as the center of gravity of the region. Second, we need to support the second law. We don't need the entire ASEAN or Southeast Asia engaged. We just need a minilateral coalition of like-minded and dedicated states to deal with counterbalancing or countervailing China, such as a US, Japan, Philippine trilateral. Third is we need credibility and sustainability of efforts. Simply put, we do not want a second version of the Scarborough Shoal standoff of 2012 happening, because that is one thing that debunks the credibility of the US in the region. And the fourth one is you need a theory of victory. And speaking of theory of victory, next slide, we go back to Iceland and UK Cod War of the 1950s, 60s, 70s, wherein we have a small country like Iceland able to overcome the prowess of the UK when they were fighting over their maritime claims, and this was during pre-UNCLOS years. Iceland was able to overcome UK for the following reasons. One, they have greater national will. They have demonstrated asymmetry of interests. They were able to take political risks, and they were able to use non-lethal innovative tactics. Taking off from the theory of victory of Iceland, next. Last year, my policy center wrote and presented the Filipino theory of victory, and it's based on a national will, concept of national will. National will is based on one, the political will of the state, and the people's will of the general population together. Next slide. That Filipino theory of victory requires certain attributes. As described in the slide, it must restore the Filipinos' access to its entitlements, energize the discriminating Filipino electorate to vote for the proper politicians, avoid direct conflict with China, resist China malign influence, ensure the business industries are resilient against Chinese economic coercion, and lastly, to be able to employ its convening power to engage the other countries in the region. Filipino theory of victory requires also synergy among its leadership, political leadership, to be able to work together, to be able to provide the proper leadership, direction, and strategy. Next slide. Now, a theory of victory needs an implementing guideline, and that is a dual-track strategy, a denial strategy to address the current situation, and a cost imposition strategy in case of conflict. Next slide. If I am to write the campaign plan for that strategy, it will appear like this. It is multi-domain and can be responsive in terms of cross-domain situations. At the end of the day, the political end state that we desire is a Filipino who are enlightened and responsible citizenry, willing to fight and resist threats against its way of life and national patrimony, and a state which adheres to the rule of law, pursues the country's national interests, in a public that supports the President's national security agenda. Next slide. Final takeaway, we need a holistic maritime defense and security strategy. We need to look at multi-domain challenges: space, air, maritime, homeland, cyber, and cognitive. Agencies need to break down the institutional stovepipes that prevent cooperation and synergy. The Philippines needs to leverage alliance and partnerships. And lastly, the sea lines of communications, such as Bashi Channel, will be the decisive points of future conflict. That ends my presentation. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you, sir. We much appreciate your presentation. Admiral Gavin?
Yes, thank you very much, Congressman Bob Pittenger, sir. To my fellow speakers, the distinguished